A billionaire pointed his glass across the ballroom and sneered at a poor waiter. "Dance this waltz, and you may marry one of my daughters. Fail, and crawl out on your knees." The guests roared with laughter. But what happened next? No one in that glittering hall could have ever imagined. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching this from? We love seeing how far these stories travel. The chandeliers above glowed like frozen constellations, scattering diamonds of light across the marble ballroom. 100 conversations floated in the air, laughter swelling like champagne bubbles, violins singing a delicate waltz in the corner. The Caldwell Hotel's grand opening was meant to be the event of the season. The richest of Manhattan had come to celebrate Richard Caldwell, the man who believed he had built not only an empire of glass and steel, but also his own legend. At the edge of the glittering crowd, dressed in a black vest and white shirt slightly too large for his lean frame, Elias Carter balanced a silver tray of champagne flutes. His steps were precise, measured. He had learned long ago that in places like this, invisibility was survival. Don't speak, don't stumble, don't attract attention, but fate has a cruel way of choosing moments. A guest in diamonds, laughing too loudly, bumped into Elias's shoulder. The tray tilted. Crystal flutes cascaded forward like a wave, crashing against marble with an explosion of sound. Champagne spread in golden rivers across the floor. The ballroom froze. Conversations died mid-sentence. Heads turned as one and then laughter. A slow ripple at first, then a roar. "Careful, boy," sneered a man near the orchestra, raising his glass as though in a toast. Elias's hands trembled as he bent down, gathering the shards with a napkin. His cheeks burned. The laughter pressed on his back like lead. He wanted to disappear. That was when Richard Caldwell himself stepped forward. The billionaire's tuxedo shimmered midnight black under the chandeliers. His silver hair was slicked back, his eyes sharp as knives. Caldwell thrived on moments like this. He loved a crowd, loved control, loved the chance to remind the world of hierarchy. "Well, well, well," Caldwell's voice boomed, slurring faintly from too many glasses of whiskey. He raised his champagne flute high, his grin cutting. "This young man thinks he's fit to serve my guests, yet he cannot balance a simple tray." Laughter swelled again, obedient, sycophantic. "Father." A soft voice tried to interrupt. It was Clara Caldwell, the youngest daughter, standing near the dais. She looked uncomfortable, her pale hands twisting the silk of her gown, but Richard ignored her. His gaze bored into Elias, who still crouched, sweeping up shards. "Tell me, boy," Richard continued, his tone dripping with mockery. "Do you know how to dance?" "No," he chuckled. "Perhaps we should test you. After all, coordination is important in any line of work, even for those beneath us." The crowd chuckled. Elias swallowed, keeping his eyes on the shards. He didn't answer. His silence only fed Caldwell's arrogance. "Here's my offer," Richard said, striding into the center of the room, holding court like a king. "If you can dance the waltz and not just dance, but dance better than anyone here, I will allow you the greatest honor." He turned, sweeping his champagne toward his 3 daughters, each dressed in gowns worth more than Elias's entire year's wages. "You may choose one of my daughters to marry." Gasps, then raucous laughter. Guests clutched their pearls, slapped each other on the back, delighted by the cruelty masquerading as entertainment. "Richard, that's outrageous," muttered one of the business partners, but he smirked anyway, unwilling to cross the host. "Father." "Stop," Clara whispered again, but her words drowned under the crowd's delight. "And if you fail," Caldwell's grin sharpened, "you will crawl from this room on your knees. A proper exit for the help." The room buzzed with excitement. Bets were already whispered. This was better than opera, better than theater. The humiliation of a poor boy for the amusement of the rich. Elias remained still, his back straightening slowly as if something inside him had shifted. He looked up, his dark eyes meeting Caldwell's. For the first time, his expression wasn't shame but something else, an ember of defiance. "You want me to dance?" Elias's voice was quiet but clear. It sliced through the murmurs like a blade. The laughter dimmed. Caldwell blinked, surprised. "What's this?" "The boy speaks?" "I'll do it," Elias said. He rose to his feet, no longer crouched in servitude but standing tall. His posture carried something unfamiliar in that gilded room. Dignity. "I accept your challenge." The guests gasped again, but this time there was unease beneath the amusement. Richard Caldwell's grin faltered for just a breath before returning. "Splendid," he barked. "Oh, this will be rich. Better than I imagined." He turned to his wife, Eleanor Caldwell, a tall woman with polished poise and a reputation for teaching dance lessons to Manhattan's elite. "Darling," Richard purred, "do us the honor of representing the family's grace." Eleanor arched a brow. "Richard, must I?" "Of course," he said, smirking. What better way to prove the difference between refinement and desperation? The guests murmured approval. Eleanor gave a venomous smile, then glided forward like a swan preparing for the spotlight. From the shadows at the edge of the room, Elias clenched his fists. His heart thundered, but not from fear. For years he had buried a truth under exhaustion, under duty, under poverty. He had once lived for dance. Not for applause, not for glory, but for the freedom it gave him. The way it let him escape grief, poverty, and the heavy silence of loss. He remembered his father's voice in their Harlem apartment, teaching him the first steps of a waltz with shoes scraping the worn linoleum floor. "The floor doesn't care who you are, son. Dance with truth and it will carry you." Elias's chest tightened. He could almost feel his father's hand guiding his shoulder again. Laughter erupted nearby. Richard was strutting, gathering bets, taunting the boy's silence. "Place your wagers, ladies and gentlemen. Who dares bet on the waiter? 1,000 to 1 he doesn't last 30 seconds. The crowd roared. But in the corner, an older man in a security uniform had stopped moving. His sharp eyes studied Elias with recognition. He whispered under his breath, "It can't be. That's the Carter boy. I saw him dance once. My God, he was extraordinary." The violin swelled. The stage was set, and as Elias took his first step toward the center of the ballroom, silence rolled over the laughter, because there was something in his stride now. Not servitude, not shame, but the quiet power of someone who had decided, "Tonight, I will not bow. Tonight they will see me." The room did not return to its easy laughter after Elias stepped forward. It hovered instead in a new kind of silence, uneasy, expectant, like the inhale before a storm breaks. Somewhere behind the floral arches, the orchestra tuned with restless bows, uncertain whether they were about to provide music or witness a public undoing. Elias stood at the edge of the dance floor, palms open, drawing in the slow, steadying breath he used to take before stepping into the light. The world narrowed, the mirrored columns, the polished marble, the soft thud of his own pulse in his ears. He could almost hear his father counting time. 1, 2, 3, feel, don't force. The floor is a promise. Keep it and it will keep you back. Kid. The voice came low as though it didn't want to belong to this room. Elias turned. A security guard with a lined face and night-quiet eyes had drifted to his shoulder. The man's name tag read A. Alvarez. Up close, his gaze was sharper than his age suggested. "I don't want to put you on the spot," Alvarez murmured, eyes still on the crowd, "but I've seen that posture before." He tilted his chin at Elias's feet. "You don't stand like a waiter about to be scolded. You stand like a dancer about to tell the truth." Elias blinked. "You must be confusing me with someone else." "No," Alvarez said softly. "Harlem Community Center. Spring Showcase. Your father cued the portable speaker himself. You were, what, 14, 15? You danced a waltz that made the whole gym forget it had creaking bleachers." The corner of his mouth lifted. "I was head of security there before budget cuts. I remember the ones who made time stop." The memory opened like a door Elias kept locked from the inside. He hadn't meant to let it. But as the crowd fanned out around the dance floor, as bets traded hands and a murmur of anticipation built, the hallway of years beckoned and he stepped through. It had been raining that spring, raining for weeks, so that the sidewalks of Lenox Avenue shone like vinyl and smelled of the city's metal heart. Elias's father, Isaiah, had left work early from the repair shop, his hands smelling of engine oil and peppermint gum. He'd come home whistling to keep the apartment bright, popping the last of the day's tips into a mason jar they labeled Dance Shoes Fund in a kid's scrawl. He had taught Elias to waltz in their kitchen with the fridge humming backup, his big palms featherlight on his son's shoulders. "Everybody has a stage," Isaiah would say, looping their small living room into a ballroom with nothing but belief. Sometimes it's a kitchen. Sometimes it's the world. Doesn't matter. What matters is that when the music calls your name, you answer it without apology. They'd go down to the community center on Saturday mornings, Elias in beat-up sneakers. Isaiah in a cap he claimed made him look respectably intimidating to the coaches. The gym smelled like floor polish and hope. Kids from every corner of the neighborhood learned counts and courage on the same linoleum squares. When the speakers were busted, they sang the melody themselves. When the mirrors cracked, they learned to feel the lines without seeing them. At 14, Elias won his first neighborhood competition, a waltz stitched together from YouTube videos and library books, smoothed by hours in the hallway, his mother peeking from behind the doorframe with a dish towel in her hands. They celebrated with corner store cupcakes and a paper crown. Later that night, Isaiah put the ribbon above the stove like a saint's relic. "We don't wait for permission to be excellent," he said. "We practice until excellence becomes our habit." Then the winter that followed arrived with a hard edge. 2 paychecks disappeared when the shop closed for renovations, and his mother's cough stopped sounding inexpensive. They stretched groceries in faith like taffy, made thin without breaking, and then one awful Tuesday life proved itself less elastic than love. Isaiah didn't come home from a late delivery on the Cross Bronx. A drunk driver clipped him at the light. The mason jar shattered with a single wordless night. Grief is a kind of silence that crawls into your shoes and slows you down. Elias stopped going to the community center for a while. He took the late shift at a deli, his hands smelling of cold cuts and bleach instead of resin and rosin. The dance ribbon above the stove collected grease. When he did try to move, the counts wouldn't line up. They sounded like a clock reminding him of rent. One afternoon, months later, he drifted back to the gym out of habit or hunger. Mr. C, the volunteer coach with a tired laugh and patient hands, didn't say, "Where have you been?" or "You missed a lot." He just tipped his chin at the floor and said, "Whenever you're ready." In that kindness, Elias heard his father's voice again. He stepped out. He counted. The music found him like a dog that had known his scent all along. When the waltz rose, he followed. He learned to fold grief into movement the way bakers fold sugar into butter, carefully, without beating the air out. He worked nights, studied when he could, practiced in shadows, let the floor hold secrets he couldn't say. Judges started remembering his name at local showcases. Nothing huge, no scholarships, no magical rescue, just a handful of small wins that paid for bus fare, a good pair of shoes, the feeling that dreams hadn't abandoned him even if he had to tuck them under his arm while he swept floors. Then came the bigger temptations, a short-lived offer to join a touring crew, no health insurance, lots of promises, declined after his mother's doctor warned of complications that would need pills and regular appointments. Elias shelved the road. He took steady pay instead. Catering gigs, hotel events, the new Caldwell property hiring anyone with a clean shirt and a polite yes. He told himself he hadn't given up. He had deferred. Debt had a way of asking for choreography, too. "Kid?" Alvarez's voice pulled him back to the Caldwell ballroom. He followed the guard's gaze to the cluster of men near the bar, rolling amusement in their mouths the way some folks roll cigars. Richard Caldwell held court at the center, cashing smug smiles along with chips. "They think tonight is about a joke." Alvarez's tone was gentle, not goading. "But I know a thing about stages. They show people for what they are." "Why tell me?" Elias asked. "Because I've watched a lot of young men memorize other people's limits," Alvarez said. "It starts with a laugh. It ends with a ceiling. I don't want that for you." He hesitated. "I can't stop the spectacle, but I can make sure there's a record." He lifted his phone, not ostentatiously, just enough. "If you want out later, I'll delete it." "Your call," Elias swallowed. The lights felt hotter. Beyond Alvarez's shoulder, Clara Caldwell had drifted a little away from her sisters, who were delightedly whispering behind jeweled hands. Clara's eyes held something like protest or worry or both. When Elias caught her glance, she looked down quickly, then back up, and gave the smallest of nods. It wasn't approval of her father. It was acknowledgement of his humanity. In this room, that felt radical. Eleanor Caldwell signaled to the orchestra, the conductor lifting his hands with the weary graciousness of a man who has seen too many requests he doesn't respect. "A standard Viennese," she announced, turning a slow, elegant circle so the crowd could admire it. "Shall we remind everyone how it's meant to look?" She moved nicely, clean posture, studied turns, polish gleaming like veneer. The applause afterward was plentiful but shallow. like rain that never sinks into the ground. Elias watched closely anyway, not to imitate but to read the room's appetite. They liked neatness, symmetry, certainty. He could provide those. But the night demanded something else, truth dressed in form. As Eleanor curtsied, Richard raised his voice. "And now our guest performer." He savored the phrase as if it had thorns. "Little man, try not to slip." Elias stepped forward, and for a heartbeat the ballroom shrank until it was the community center floor. The linoleum good enough, the broken mirror honest. He placed his right hand over his left wrist to steady the tremor, then let his arms fall to his sides. He nodded to the conductor, not obsequious, not cocky, simply as one professional to another. The conductor searched his face, found an unexpected steadiness there, and inclined his head in return. Before the music, Elias bent, not to kneel, not to beg, but to pinch a shard of glass from the floor that housekeeping had missed. He set it on the tray table. He wiped his palms on his apron. Then he unclipped the apron and handed it to Alvarez without looking away from the dance floor. "Hold this for me," he said. It came out like a plea and a promise at once. Alvarez took it as if it were a flag. "Wait," Clara said suddenly, almost too softly to hear. Elias turned. She stepped toward him, hesitated in the bright ring of attention, then offered the simplest of gifts. Space. She took 2 steps back to widen the circle around him, and lifted her chin at the nearest guests until they followed suit. A ring formed, clean, true. A place to begin, Richard scoffed. "What are you doing, Clara?" "He doesn't need a stage. He needs luck." "No," she said, and if her voice shook, it did not break. "He needs room." The orchestra raised their bows. "Count," Isaiah whispered from the better room beyond memory. 1, 2, 3. "The floor is a promise, son. Keep it, and it will keep you back." Elias closed his eyes. The past flickered through him in snapshots. The paper crown, the mason jar, the cold deli slicer at 2 a.m., his mother asleep in a chair with the TV murmuring, the scuffed community center floor and the way applause sounds when it's for effort, not pedigree. He felt the weight of the hotel vest slide from his shoulders in his mind, even as it stayed on his body. He felt his spine lengthen, not in arrogance but in agreement with gravity. When he opened his eyes, he was not smaller for this room. He was exactly his size. "I'm not dancing to marry anyone," he said, voice steady, carrying just far enough. "I'm dancing to keep my word to myself." "What word is that?" Richard called, amused. "To never let someone else's ridicule become my rhythm," Elias said. Somewhere in the crowd a breath caught. The conductor's baton dipped. The first measure bloomed from the strings, warm, unhurried, like dawn. Elias shifted his weight. The floor answered with the softest squeak, the kind that told him it was listening. He took a single half-step to test the friction, the give, the truth of the room. It held. "Kid," Alvarez whispered behind him, voice suddenly thick. "They don't know what's coming." Elias didn't either, not entirely. That was the point. Dance had always been a conversation, not a script. The room speaks, the body replies. The waltz turned its face toward him like an old friend with new stories, and he lifted his hands to meet it. From the edge of the floor, Clara pressed her palms together. Not prayer, not applause. Something between. With the third measure rising, Elias set his foot and let everything he had been, son, student, server, survivor, fold into the count. 1, 2, 3. He stepped into the light. The bow dropped. The first chord of the waltz rippled into the air, rich and golden, filling the ballroom with its slow inevitability. Conversations died away, replaced by the rise and fall of strings. Even the chandeliers seemed to shimmer in time with the melody. Elias stood alone in the circle of light, no longer a waiter in a borrowed vest, but a man stepping into the oldest covenant he knew, the promise between music and motion. His breath slowed. His father's voice lingered. "The floor will hold you. Let it." He lifted his arm, not tentatively, not timidly, but with a fluid certainty that drew eyes like magnets. The movement was so natural it felt less like performance and more like conversation, as though the music had whispered a secret, and he had answered without words. At first his steps were simple, measured. Hiltutu, turn pause. The crowd smirked. Was this all? A poor boy shuffling in circles? But then came the shift. On the downbeat, Elias's spine lengthened, his shoulders opened, and suddenly every step breathed purpose. He glided across the marble as though the floor had softened for him alone. Each pivot was precise yet unforced, each sweep of his arm carving invisible arcs in the air. The laughter faded into stillness. This is impossible, muttered one guest, leaning forward. Victoria Caldwell, Eleanor's closest friend and herself an amateur dancer, gripped her pearls. Those aren't beginner's steps. He knows technique. By the second refrain, Elias had let go of hesitation. He poured his story into the dance, grief, hunger, resilience. Every rotation carried echoes of Harlem's community gym, of kitchen floors scuffed by practice, of nights when exhaustion didn't kill the rhythm inside him. He spun into a series of turns, sharp, controlled, breathtaking. Not ballroom polish, but ballet grace stitched to street-born resilience. His body spoke in a language money couldn't buy. I have been broken. I have been underestimated. But I am still here, still moving. The audience, once eager for humiliation, leaned forward in stunned silence. Some even forgot to breathe. Good Lord, whispered a patron of the arts. He's not dancing. He's testifying. Near the dais, Richard Caldwell's smirk cracked. He had expected stumbling comedy, not this eruption of artistry. His glass trembled slightly, though he forced another laugh. Parlor tricks, he said loudly, trying to reassure himself as much as the crowd. But his wife Eleanor's eyes had narrowed. She knew craft when she saw it. This wasn't a waiter guessing his way through steps. This was discipline, training, mastery hidden beneath years of silence. The music swelled. Elias leapt into a grand rise, an echo of ballet woven into the waltz. For a fraction of a second he seemed to hover above the marble, suspended between heaven and earth. Gasps broke from the crowd. He landed as though kissed by gravity, then unfurled into a series of spins. Faster, faster, his body a whirlwind of precision. It was not perfection alone that stunned them, but the sheer emotion etched into every motion. His eyes blazed with something untouchable. By the time the orchestra struck its final note, Elias held his last pose, arms outstretched, chin high, chest heaving but unbroken. The silence afterward was heavier than applause. It stretched, electric, as if the room itself was deciding what to do with the truth it had just witnessed. Then it came. A single clap, then another, and another. Like rain gathering force, applause rolled across the hall until it thundered, rattling glassware echoing off marble. "Bravo!" cried someone near the orchestra. "Incredible!" shouted another. Some guests even rose to their feet, abandoning the cruel game they had once cheered. The applause was no longer polite, it was reverent, raw, uncontrollable. Eleanor Caldwell's painted smile had collapsed into disbelief. Victoria turned pale, and Richard Caldwell, once the emperor of the evening, looked small, his authority cracked open under the weight of beauty. From the back, Alvarez stepped forward, his phone still raised. His voice carried, steady and clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, do you know who you've just witnessed? That's Elias Carter, winner of 3 youth dance competitions across New York. The boy who once made a Harlem gym feel like Vienna." A ripple of gasps coursed through the crowd. Some remembered old local articles, grainy photos of a young boy crowned with paper ribbons. The puzzle pieces slid together. This was not a clumsy waiter miraculously surviving humiliation. This was a dancer reborn. Jonathan Caldwell, Richard's son, stood frozen with his recording phone. His face was pale, but his eyes glimmered with awe. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered the camera and began to clap harder than anyone else. Elias bowed, not deeply, not deferentially, but with dignity. He did not smile. He did not bask. He simply acknowledged the music, the crowd, the truth of what had been proven. And when he lifted his head, his gaze found Richard Caldwell. It was not the look of a servant toward a master, nor of a beggar toward a benefactor. It was the look of a man toward another man, equal, unshaken, unafraid. For the first time all evening, Richard Caldwell had no words. The thunder of applause was still reverberating through the marble when Richard Caldwell finally slammed his glass on a table. The sharp crack cut through the ovation. The crowd stilled, nervous, uncertain whether to follow the tide of admiration or the power of the man who had summoned them here. "That was enough," Richard barked, his voice hoarse but still commanding. His face was pale beneath the chandeliers, beads of sweat glinting like betrayal across his brow. Parlor tricks. That wasn't real dancing. This entire farce, he gestured violently toward Elias, means nothing. But the words didn't land. Not this time, because something had shifted. Elias was no longer the waiter they had mocked. He stood at the center of the room with his chest rising steady, the echo of music still clinging to his frame. His silence made Richard's rant look smaller, his calm dignity a mirror exposing arrogance for what it was. From the back, Alvarez raised his phone higher. The screen glowed, replaying Richard's drunken voice from earlier. If he can dance the waltz better than my wife, he may marry any one of my daughters, fail, and he crawls on his knees. The sound carried across the ballroom like a curse. Murmurs rippled through the guests. No one could deny it now. The billionaire's cruel challenge wasn't gossip. It was proof captured, undeniable. Care to retract, Mr. Caldwell? Alvarez asked, his voice steady as stone. Richard's jaw tightened. That was a joke. A jest among friends. You cannot possibly... It wasn't a joke when you made him crawl in your words, said a woman in a crimson gown. Her voice shook, not with fear but with fury. It wasn't a joke when we all laughed. The room fell silent again, but this silence belonged not to Richard. It belonged to Elias. Richard turned toward his daughters as though seeking rescue. The two eldest looked away, unwilling to soil their gowns with the ugliness of his promise. But Clara, gentle Clara, stepped forward. Father. Her voice rang clear, surprising even herself. You must honor your word, gasps, head swiveled. Clara's cheeks flushed, but she pressed on. Elias has more grace in his movement than you've ever shown in your power. You promised marriage. If you mean to be a man of your word, keep it. Richard's hand trembled. His empire had always been built on reputation, his contracts inked on the weight of his word. To break it now in front of 200 witnesses and a recording device was to shred the very currency he traded in. Ridiculous, he spat. Utterly ridiculous. Finally, Elias's voice cut the air. It was quiet, but it commanded more respect than Richard's roar. I don't want your daughter as a prize, he said, turning first to Clara, then to the room. Marriage is not a trophy handed from arrogance. It is a choice between equals born of respect and love. He let the words settle, then raised his chin. What I want is something greater. I want your apology. Not whispered in shame, spoken here. To every worker you mock, to every person you dismiss tonight as less. I want you to admit that you judged me. Not on skill, not on character, but on uniform and skin. A ripple of shock ran through the guests. No one had ever demanded such words from Richard Caldwell in public. Richard's lips twisted. Apologize? To him? Never, but the crowd stirred. These were not strangers on the street. They were investors, partners, socialites who lived by proximity to power, and right now power was shifting before their eyes. The applause still rang in their ears, the memory of beauty too fresh to be erased by rage. Say it, urged a voice from the back. Apologize, echoed another. Soon the chant grew, not loud, not raucous, but insistent, a drumbeat of truth. Richard Caldwell, the man who had bent boards and bulldozed neighborhoods with contracts, stood cornered not by money but by morality. His face collapsed in on itself. He opened his mouth, but no sound came. He looked at his son Jonathan, who stood tall beside Elias, his hand on the young man's shoulder. Jonathan's eyes were steady. It's over, Dad. News traveled faster than music. By the next morning, Alvarez's recording was everywhere. Billionaire humiliates waiter. Waiter dances into glory blazed across headlines. Social media crowned Elias the waltzing lion. Richard's phone rang not with congratulations but with withdrawals. Partners severing ties. Board members calling emergency meetings. Within a week, Caldwell Holdings forced Richard to resign. His empire, once untouchable, crumbled in the court of public opinion. But Elias was rising. He turned down offers from reality TV shows hungry for spectacle. He ignored flashy sponsorships that wanted to use his name for their branding. Instead, he returned to Harlem, where the linoleum gym still smelled of polish and possibility. With donations pouring in, he founded the Isaiah Carter Foundation for Dance, a school for kids who carried dreams too heavy for their pockets. He bought mirrors that wouldn't crack, shoes that wouldn't blister, instruments that wouldn't go silent when the power flickered. At the ribbon cutting, children swirled across the floor in mismatched leotards, laughter as loud as the violins. Alvarez stood proudly at the edge, Clara volunteering beside him, handing out programs. Jonathan was there too, not as a Caldwell heir, but as a supporter who believed in something bigger than money. Elias stood in the center, watching the children stumble and spin, eyes bright with the future. Dance is not about perfection, he told them. It's about resilience. When the world tries to laugh you into silence, you answer with movement. When someone tries to shame you, you rise with grace. That is the truest dance of all. The applause that followed wasn't from chandeliers or champagne. It was from children who saw themselves reflected in a man who had once carried trays and now carried legacy. And in that applause, Elias heard his father again. The floor will hold you, always. He smiled. Because he knew now, the dance was no longer just his. It belonged to every soul who had ever been underestimated.
Elias's story reminds us that dignity and resilience can outshine even the brightest chandeliers. If you believe in stories like his, hit subscribe and let's keep spreading hope together.